should start. So we are super happy to have Luca Opromolla. Luca is a principal economist at the Economic and Research Department of Bank of Portugal. He has done tremendous work on international trade, factor mobility, and also firm dynamics. So it's super happy to have you here, Luca. So today he's going to talk about goods and factor market integration, a quantitative assessment of the EU enlargement, which I think is a super interesting topic.
Yeah.
Luca, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So making fun of you, I mean, we are friends, so I'm super happy to be here.
Okay.
Just after super happy a lot. No, I'm really happy, thank you for being here. So I've been visiting the workshop for 2-3 weeks so far, and I'm having a great time. So thank you so much to all of you. I think it's not always easy nowadays to find an academic environment, first of all, multidisciplinary and and friendly, where really there is this feeling of discussing, cooperating without too much fear. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I hope I will be able to convey the main message of this paper. We are currently revising it, so this is a great moment for us to get comments. It's a joint paper with Lorenzo Caliendo, Fernando Parra, and Alessandro Sforza. And since I am an employee of the Central Bank of Portugal, I have to say that the analysis, opinions, and findings represent the views of the authors. They are not necessarily those of Banco de Portugal or the Eurosystem. Okay, so what is this paper about? So this is a paper about economic integration and two particular dimensions of economic integration, the goods market and the factor market, and in particular the labor market. So far in most of the economic literatures, these dimensions have been treated separately. In particular, there is a lot of work in international trade literature on trade liberalization. So a lot of trade agreements, preferential trade agreements have been studied with a focus on tariffs, reduction of tariffs, quotas, and so on. The labor literature has looked a lot at the effect of labor mobility on employment and wages, in particular checking what is the effect of immigration on the employment and wages of natives. But usually always done with an empirical approach, reduced form approach, which is totally fine, but it's a different methodology from the one that has been adopted in international trade literature, where recently there is a lot of emphasis on quantitative trade models, so quantitative general equilibrium trade models. So what we do in this paper, we try to put the two together, mainly with the motivation that integration in the goods market can affect labor mobility, and labor mobility itself can affect trade flows. So integration in the goods market may affect labor mobility because it can affect wages because of a change in the demand for different kinds of workers, but it can also affect prices, first of all because there is a direct effect from a reduction in tariffs, for example. So these changes in wages and prices over countries can affect your decision to move to another country or to stay. The other way around is that if there is labor mobility, then this labor mobility across countries can affect how efficient countries are in producing goods. Maybe some country is in need of high-skilled workers, so if there is an inflow of high-skilled workers, that can increase the productivity of the country and have an effect on trade flows. So the two dimensions interact with each other, and we want to allow for that in this study. So we will study both trade and migration policy at the same time. So we will do that looking at a particular historical example, which is the 2004 European Union enlargement. So it's one of the biggest examples of economic integration so far. So it was an agreement between 15 member states of the European Union and 10 countries in Eastern Europe, so the countries in yellow. And it was a complex agreement, but we will look at this enlargement mainly through the lenses of labor market integration and trade integration. So what happened? So in terms of trade policy, there were two major changes. First of all, before the enlargement, there were some trade barriers, in particular tariffs, between the old member states, so the EU 15 members, and the prospective new members, the new member states. And there were some trade barrier also between every two new member states, so among this group of new member states as well. So progressively, these tariffs were reduced and they went to zero in 2004. The second change in terms of trade policy is that each of these new member state countries from Eastern Europe had its own trade agreements with other countries in the rest of the world. So when they joined the European Union, they gave up their trade agreements and they joined the European Union Common Commercial Policy. So they joined the trade agreements of the European Union. Okay. In terms of migration policy, by EU law, as soon as a country joins the European Union, then in theory, nationals of the new country should be able to freely move to all the other member states in the European Union and have access to the labor market of the other countries in the European Union without any discrimination. For this enlargement, there was a sort of exception to this general rule, in the sense that the old member states, the EU 15 countries, could decide not to open immediately the labor market to the citizens of the new member states. Some countries, so about a month before the enlargement, all the countries were ready to open their labor market, or at least they were declaring that they were going to open their labor market. But then when they signed the enlargement, different decisions were taken, and some countries opened their labor market immediately, like the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Sweden. So they opened their labor market to the citizens of the countries in Eastern Europe in 2004. Other countries like Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal waited a couple of years, so they had the option of doing that, so they opened in 2006. Other countries like France waited other 2 years, so they opened in 2008, other countries in 2009, and by 2011 all the countries had to open their labor market. So in 2011, for example, Germany and Austria opened their labor market to the new member states. So it was a sequential opening of the labor market. Okay, so the trade policy change started even before the enlargement and concluded in 2004. While the labor market policy change basically started in some sense also before the enlargement, but then mostly from 2004 on until 2011. Okay, so we want to study what are the effects of these two policy changes on a number of variables, but in particular on migration flows. So what are the effects of the reduction in tariffs and of the opening of the labor market on migration flows within Europe and outside, and what are the effects on the welfare of citizens. So we have to face a number of challenges in order to do that. So first of all, we need a good theoretical framework in order to study this event. So most of the literature in international trade was relying on static trade models, but here we needed a dynamic model, in particular because this was a sequential process. So where some countries opened their labor market immediately, but other countries open only later on. And we needed a model where we could study both changes in trade policy and changes in labor market policy, in particular where there was a migration decision in the model. So we developed such a model where citizens at every point in time can decide to stay in a country or can migrate to another country. If they migrate, they have to sustain a cost of migration. that might be specific to their type, like it could be different if they are low-skilled workers or if they are high-skilled workers, but in particular is specific to their nationality. So in this exercise, nationality is very important to keep track of nationality because of the sequentiality of the process. So in 2004, for example, Polish citizens could move from Poland to the UK, but they could not move to France. And if they moved to the UK in 2005, they could still not move to France because France opened its labor market only in 2009. But British citizens that were residing in the UK, just like the Polish citizens who had just arrived, they could easily and without any problem, quote unquote, move to France. So it's important to keep track of the nationality. Another important ingredient that we had to take into account is that this was a very diverse set of countries, even between the old member states, but in particular when comparing the group of the old and the new member states. So they were very different in terms of size. There was, for example, Malta with more or less 500,000 people joining, and Poland with about 38 million people. Different in terms of technology, different in terms of skill endowment. Then the next challenge was data. So this was the first project for each of us that had the component of migration. So we thought, we are talking about Europe, there must be all the possible data on migration flows within Europe. Probably we just need to go to the Eurostat website and we'll find everything. And we realized that that was not the case. So most of the migration literature was relying on information from the census. So information every 5 or 10 years. And information about stocks of immigrants. So here we needed information on flows of immigrants, not stocks. And in particular, bilateral gross migration flows. So we needed to know how many people were moving from Poland to the UK in 2004, and maybe how many people were moving from the UK to Poland later on. And we needed to know that in particular by skill and by nationality. So we built our own data set of bilateral gross migration flows, taking advantage of the European Union Labour Force Survey. This is a labour force survey that is carried on in every European country and other countries as well. And it's the major source of education and labor statistics for the European Union. But in particular, they ask one question that is key for us. So they ask, where were you living 12 months ago? So we use this question in order to identify movers, so migrants. So we are able then to build a data set of bilateral gross migration flows for every 2 European countries between 2002 until 2015 by nationality and by skill. Then the next challenge was to measure changes in migration costs. So so we needed to identify how big were these shocks. In terms of trade policy, we had to take a stand and we decided to focus on tariffs. And then tariffs is an information that you can find easily. We can see the change in tariffs from one year to the other. It's difficult to come up with a number for the change in migration costs. So in order to identify that, we had to use our data on migration flows. We had to use our model, and we had to use some characteristics of the enlargement, in particular this sequentiality process. So the general idea is that if in 2004 we see all of a sudden a large inflow of Polish citizens moving from Poland to the UK, we kind of infer that that's due to a reduction in the cost of migrating from Poland to the UK. However, we have to take into account some possible confounding factors. So these citizens might move from Poland to the UK because all of a sudden the UK is a much better place to live for everybody, not just for Polish. Or because Poland is a much lesser place, much lesser good place where to live. So how do we separate the change in the migration cost from the change in the appeal of living in the UK and the change in the appeal of living in Poland? So we consider a third group of countries, for example, Germany, Austria, and Denmark, and Belgium, that will open their labor market to new member states only later on, not before 2008. So this is a kind of control group. So we can look at the flow of Polish citizens moving from Poland to this group of countries, Germany, Belgium, Austria, and moving from this group of countries to the UK in order to account for the appeal of leaving Poland and the appeal of moving to the UK, and then take as a residual the change in the cost of migrating from Poland to the UK. Another challenge we had to face was that if we want to have all this heterogeneity in the model, like in terms of technology, in terms of skill endowment, in terms of capital, trade cost, we also need to measure all these variables. In particular, we need to measure their not just technology is different between Poland and the UK in 1 year, but also how the evolution is different over time. So here we rely on the particular structure of the model, using this trick that has been developed in the trade literature. And the intuition here is that we are sort of doing a difference in different exercise with the model. So it's a structural difference in different exercise. So we are going to compare two economies, a baseline economy with a counterfactual economy. The counterfactual economy, even though I call it counterfactual, it's what actually happened in reality, the European Union enlargement. So a reduction in trade cost and a reduction in migration cost. The baseline economy is what would have happened if there had been no enlargement. No reduction in trade cost, no reduction in migration cost. And the assumption is that these things like technology, capital, transportation costs are going to evolve in the same way in the two economies. And so when we compare the two economies, they are going to cancel out. And so we don't need to measure them, which is good because measurement of some of these variables is very prone to error. Okay, so we could make a lot of mistakes. So in other words, we are taking the evolution of all these variables from the data. So we will be able to match exactly the evolution of trade flows in the data, the evolution of allocation of labor across countries in the data, the wages in the data. Of course, the compromise is that we have to believe in our model. Okay. The final challenge is that there are some key parameters in the exercise that we need to know in order to evaluate the effect of the enlargement on welfare or migration flows. So for example, we need to know what we call the international migration elasticity. So how sensitive are migration flows to changes in migration costs. So as soon as you reduce the cost of migrating from Poland to the UK by 5%, how fast are people in moving from Poland to the UK? So we need to know this, and so we will need to estimate it. And then how substitutable are low-skilled and high-skilled workers? Okay, so there are many estimates in the literature of this, but mostly for the US, less so for the case of Europe. So we use some of the available estimates, but we also propose new ways of estimating this parameter and trying to solve some endogeneity problems. So, oh wow, I'm already out of time?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Take a bit longer.
It's fine.
sorry.
Do a little bit of cherry picking of what you want to show.
Yeah, so we show that the effect of the enlargement on migration flows is consistent but very gradual over time. And it mostly involves low-skilled workers. So this is the bulk of people that move from the east to the west because of the enlargement. In terms of effect on welfare, we find that all the countries that are involved in the enlargement gain from the European Union enlargement, except the low-skilled workers in the United Kingdom. So this is the only group that loses from the enlargement.
Yeah, you have Brexit.
Maybe, yes. The largest winners are low-skilled workers from the new member state countries, and to some extent also high-skilled workers in the old member state countries. We find that the EU15 countries would have lost from the enlargement if there had been only a change in migration policy, not a change in trade policy. And last, we find that even if we are interested in just in a change in migration policy or just in a change in trade policy, you have to look at the two together if you want to reach a meaningful conclusion. So for example, if you take the same change in migration policy and you analyze it using the current level of trade openness of the countries, or if you suppose that the countries were in autarky, so close to each other in terms of trade, or if you suppose that the countries are in a situation of complete free trade, you reach very different results for the same change in migration policy. Because of what I told you at the beginning, that there are all these interactions between the decision to migrate and trade policy, for example. Yeah, so what are we doing now is, well, we finished to extend the date to 2015, as I mentioned. We are distinguishing between employed and not employed, so migration of both groups. And we are, for example, we are looking at Brexit, and hopefully now we have a little bit better idea of how Brexit is going to happen, so we can replicate it in our model. Thank you, sorry for
So Dean?
So one thing you didn't talk about was the sort of political economy of the voting process to let these new states in, and I know nothing about that, but I'm sure you do. Your results suggest, I think, that basically this should have been a unanimous vote to let people in, with the exception of Britain, possibly. I mean, given some heterogeneity in it. Is there any evidence consistent with? I mean, so everybody benefits, so we should let everybody in, even within groups, within countries. Is that the way the politics played out? In fact, in 2001, 2, 3, 4, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And then to follow on to that, a lot of nations delayed the opening of the labor market. So why is that? And was that a smart or costly thing to do? There's a lot, I know, but.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, it's one of the points where we want to insist more, and we need to know more about that. So from what we learned, the decision process was not straightforward. As I mentioned, just a month before the actual enlargement, all the countries were declaring that they were going to open their labor market immediately, and then they decided otherwise. So our impression is that there was not much knowledge about what was going to happen. So it was a huge enlargement with many different dimensions. There were some worries about, yes, inflows of too many immigrants from the east. So that's why probably some countries then decided to delay the opening. And some countries like Germany and Austria, they delayed twice, actually, until they could.
Which two? Which two delayed twice?
Germany and Austria. So it was a it's a 2 + 2 + 3 or 2 + 3 + 2 process. So you could open immediately or wait 2 more years until 2006, like Greece, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. And then you could wait either 2 more years or 3 more years. I always get confused with this. And then you had the possibility, if you were to wait other 2 or 3 years until 2011 max, if you could show that there were really some sign that opening the labor market could create problems in your own country for some particular group of workers. Yeah. So no, definitely, it's a dimension that it's very interesting. We have to do a little bit more on that. It's not the focus of, it's an important ingredient, but it's not the focus of the paper, so we do not have a political economy component there. But sure.
I think, but it would be nice if it was somehow, your estimates, you felt comfortable with them, given what the politics were. I mean, right now you're sort of saying, well, no one knew what was gonna happen. I guess I find that some of these industries and some of these labor groups must have had some reasonable expectation of where this was gonna go. People had to, apply to get into the EU, and so someone had to was expecting to benefit.
Yeah, no, definitely, and we are very open to do that in the future. One problem that we have to face is that these migration flows are, especially in the first year, are very thin. Not usually it's the minority of people that is migrating, so we cannot split the data too much. We had started looking by industry and so on, but then we were ending up with very few people in every cell. So we have to stop at some point, but for sure we have to check that the aggregate results are consistent with the process.
Okay, great.
Yes, you asked about what the contribution is and if it was apparent in the introduction. And I guess to sort of address that question, I'm not exactly sure. Obviously you're making contribution to the dynamic CG literature on trade and immigration, and using this as an application. But I guess within that context, it's not clear to me how significant that is. I mean, is this the only? There must be dozens of CG models on EU integration that are stylized in different ways than this model to look at different aspects.
Yes.
Because this is another thing is it doesn't come out very clearly.
This
It's
is
a
not
very
a
stylized model.
Okay.
It leaves out, capital flows, tax structure of the countries.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the bigger picture context, how this extends the literature other than making some methodology changes, what's the value added, what's the significance, even within the trade and immigration literature. I mean, has nobody before ever integrated trade and immigration into the CG? This is a totally novel contribution. So I guess the introduction was, to me, kind of fuzzy about the nuance, the significance of this contribution relative to a narrower literature and also a broader literature.
Okay, very good. So this is not a CG model. It's not a computer general equilibrium model. In the sense we are not assuming Armington, but this is a Ricardian model.
So what do you mean by it's a Ricardian model rather than a CGE model?
So CG model usually they have Armington preferences in the sense that every country produces a different good.
So there's homogeneity in the is what you're saying?
No, it's completely heterogeneous in the sense that a good produced by France will never compete with the good produced by Germany to some extent. So this is instead a Ricardian model based on technology differences across countries, but the twist here is that it's a dynamic model because the migration decision is dynamic. So all the other models in the literature are static. So there is no...
So in the literature that uses the Ricardian...
If they use the Ricardian, and that's what they mostly do, it's static model and there is no migration decision, usually. Or if there is, in some few cases, it's people are going to migrate, either they don't migrate at all or they migrate immediately, all of them. So there is no gradual migration flows over time, which is what we observe here instead in the data. So we wanted to have a model that was allowing for potentially having these gradual migration flows over time. Not everybody moving instantly. So that's one contribution of the paper. The other big contribution, so this was mainly theoretical, the other big contribution is the data, because as I mentioned, all of the literature was based on stock of migrants, maybe for information stock of migrants, maybe for a couple of countries. every 5 or 10 years. So here you have all of a sudden a data set of not of stocks but of flows in both directions for every 2 pair of countries, year by year for a number of years. And on top of that, you can split these flows by nationality, you can split them by skill, now we split them also by employment status. So that's crucial for analyzing the European Union enlargement. So for example, by nationality, as I mentioned before, Polish citizen could move from Poland to the UK in 2004, but they could not move to France from the UK. So you need to know their nationality. Then there are these parameters that can be used for other papers as well. This migration elasticity across countries, nobody had ever estimated it before. So if you want to evaluate the effect of another event, you might use this, find this value that we give to this parameter useful. And in general, because of what I said before, the type of models, the type of data, the knowledge that we had about the effects of the European Union enlargement in 2004 were limited to some extent.
Well, did your results then differ from what other people found?
Good point. We haven't compared that enough. Yes, we check what would happen. So we have a number of channels in the model that I didn't talk a lot about. So we have this migration decision, we have this complementarity between low and high skilled workers, we have agglomeration economies, so to some extent receiving a lot of immigrants is good because it allows you to have a more diverse labor force and that could be more productive. But if some production factor like capital is in fixed supply, there could be some congestion effects, so receiving a lot of immigrants could be bad. So we see how important are all these channels. We try to shut them all down and have more of a textbook model, and we find that the results are very different, but we should compare it more with the previous attempt. Yes.
I'll jump in the queue and then I will go on. I was thinking, so it's in the case of the UK, imagine that you compare the UK and let's say France. The reason low-skilled workers are losing the UK, it's because there's something in the economic structure of the UK that makes the trade effects more important or different. It's because of migration flows, or it's essentially because Germany delay allowing workers to enter. I think it would be very interesting if you can say something about exactly what is different about the UK that pushed them in this kind of low workers losing.
Yeah, definitely. So the first order effect is the migration flows.
Okay.
So UK was, France opened only in 2009, UK opened immediately, so it was the country that received the largest inflow of workers from Eastern Europe, and mostly these were low-skilled workers.
Okay.
So the low-skilled workers in the UK were lost because of that, the high-skilled workers gained because of the complementarity with that.
Kind of a related question. And then when France and Germany started opening, so do you see like a little bit of kind of their...
Yeah, they're redirecting.
They're redirecting.
Yes, yes. In fact, we see in the data that, for example, Germany was the top destination for a Polish worker before the enlargement, mainly because of historical reasons. And then UK over time becomes the top destination, and Germany goes down until the moment in which Germany also opens its labor market, and then becomes more important again. But yes, we see this diversion of migration flows as soon as countries open.
I'm asking because I think this is very important because you have all this literature on migration that it's, path dependence because people start going to some country, then it's easier to migrate there because there is a community where, but it seems that here, it's more like standard force that is dominating it. I cannot go to France or Germany, not because I don't want to go or language barrier, it's because they are shutting me down. As soon as they allow me, I start going there too. So.
Yes, true. But notice also that they could have stayed in Poland. So there is also, in part, there is also the fact that, sure, they could not go to France, but maybe it's better for the moment to go to UK, and then later, because I know that later on France will open, so maybe it's better. It's easier than to move from the UK to France than to stay in Poland. For sure, there is this path dependence in migration decision. So there could be network effects. For example, it's easier to move the UK the more people of my own nationality have moved to the UK. We do not have that in the model, but we have that. We have control for that when we estimate the changes in migration costs. But for the model, it was a bit too complicated for the moment to have that. What we are planning to do is to change the timing of the European Union enlargement. So we can explore what would have happened if Germany had opened together with UK in 2004, for example, or if they flipped the decision.
I see.
So that's something we want to do.
Sorry, Raisham, I think you are next.
Oh, sure. Building off of your comments and questions, it seemed like the countries on the western periphery were the ones that opened up first. So you got UK and Ireland, followed by
Southern
Spain
Europe.
and Portugal.
Yeah.
So there's the transportation cost of moving, and then there's the cultural cost of moving as well. But from the perspective of those countries, was there some sort of risk assessment on like why the UK is going to open up first? Did they think, well, there's probably not going to be a lot of people coming, and maybe that's, we can open up and look like, hey, we're taking a first mover advantage, but it's probably not going to be a big flow. I don't know.
Yeah, no, very good point. Bit similar to what we were talking about before. We have to explore more this dimension. But our sense so far is that there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And Germany being right next door to Poland, I could imagine that.
That probably played, yes.
They would receive it.
Yeah, so that's probably the reason why then at the last minute they decided
right,
not to.
in Austria too.
Yeah. So yeah, we have to dig more into the literature, maybe even the newspapers at the time. Check.
And can I ask one more quick question? Was there a reasonable or measurable amount of high school or low skill workers coming from the UK or the EU 15 countries to the NMS countries? After, like, if there was going to be a new factory opening up in Poland, the manager might go from Spain to Poland.
Definitely, and there were new factories opening up after the enlargement. Yes, I think we see some evidence of that, but once more, that's one more thing we have to pay a bit more attention to, and we can definitely look at that with the data that we have. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Sure. See you. I'm sorry. Maybe in the new version I will try to answer with more details the question.
I think Tony and Scott.
Yeah. So I really liked, and I liked how you were focusing on the actual individual. I think it reminded me of that old Tibu paper, like Tibu sorting.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that. But the paper is focused a lot on like the costs of migration. It seems like there's also an opportunity to migration that kind of would maybe explain why they choose to go where they go. I mean,
Of
the
course.
cost might be really high, but the opportunity might be much greater than, not even just for their immediate employment, but for children's education or whatever. So I was wondering how that might maybe soak up some of the variation. And then I was looking at your figures 9 and I think it's 8 and 9, your maps. And it seems like the countries that delay the longest, France, Belgium, Germany, Austria, Denmark, seems to be the ones who do the best. So I thought there was this interesting maybe kind of policy learning at the national level of maybe we delay entry again in the 2-3, I think it's 2-3-2 looking back in the paper. But maybe there is some sort of like learning that, say, France is doing looking at Britain when they open up. And maybe that's a decision point that each of them makes based on something. I don't quite know, but yeah, I don't know. I really like that kind of look at it, but also kind of like the opportunity that we're there. And then I think there's another kind of version of this that's more about those decisions that states actually make to kick out their opening.
Yeah.
So, I
Thank
thought it
you.
was neat, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of focus on the cost mainly because it's something that we do not observe and we need to measure it, and so we provide a methodology to look at it. But definitely that's not. I mean, when in the model, when you move, your decision is based on the cost. Your decision is based on real wages in your own country and in a potential country where you might go to. It's based on the option value of moving. So if you move to the UK, you know that then later on from there you could move maybe with maybe more easiness to other countries from there. There is not, even though I'm very sympathetic with you, there is not the component of benefits, because there are more different unemployment benefits or family benefits, so that it's not part of the model. When we do estimate the changes in migration cost, then we control for those characteristics. So if family benefits in that particular year are much better in the UK than in Poland, we are going to control for this diversity when we estimate the change in migration cost. But it's not a driving force in the model. Just like network effects, the decision to migrate to the UK, because there are a lot of Polish already in the UK, it's not in the model. There we had to take a little bit of a stance. So, as I mentioned, there are a number of channels in the model, and already like this, it's a bit hard to handle. So we have to shut. But
Scott, I think you're next.
Honestly, my main one was already kind of asked.
I'm sorry,
answered,
and I
but
forgot
no,
the point,
yeah, go ahead.
and we have to look more. I not realize what you said, that the Western countries that open later seem to be
The winners, yeah.
more winners. Yes. So definitely for the UK, there was this effect that it was the countries with the largest inflow of low-skilled workers, and that had a negative effect on the British low-skilled workers. That's for sure. This other group of countries, Germany, Austria, Belgium, and France, that open later on, we just added them to the exercise. So we have they were not in the version of the paper that that I sent to you. Yes.
Yeah, like I said, my main one's been asked, but just briefly, I heard on the way in the other day about Montenegro's experience as they just joined, NATO, and obviously the EU agreement has been kind of punted for a while, and I'm wondering, based on that type of analysis, and them actually waiting longer to join the club, would that be, is that useful? In other words, thinking about new cycles of enlargement, and what the timing of that might look like, and frankly, what the appropriate framework might look like in thinking about those new entrants.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's useful, definitely. Maybe not for the political
right, there's a lot of other
aspect,
stuff going on there too. Yeah.
But for economic, yes.
Yeah.
I would say yes. And it's kind of refreshing because everybody asks us about Brexit. Let's do Brexit.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a different exercise.
Yeah.
Jessica, you're raising your hand. Okay, so and then you can go. Okay.
So I was curious about being more explicit about the scope conditions in the model. So
The scope conditions?
and this goes back a little bit to I think Carrie's point, but I'm sort of curious, is this so? You have this really interesting example, 2004 to 2008 or so, of the European Union expansion. I'm sort of trying to think about, is the set of relevant cases pre-existing economic unions that are deciding to enlarge or not? Is the set of scope conditions countries that are in sort of shared regions and have maybe multiple overlapping kinds of free trade agreements and are deciding about the ways in which trade policy should or shouldn't accompany migration policies? I guess I'm trying to think about, in addition to sort of suggesting that it sounds like there's a lot that you've done in terms of novel changes to the sort of models of these kinds of questions. I'm sort of thinking substantively, what are the relevant sort of places or scope
Yeah.
conditions on.
Yeah, excellent question.
Because obviously we care about the EU, but.
No, of course, no. Yes. I mean, I think it's fairly flexible. The one thing that we exploit here that is specific to this enlargement, to this exercise, I think, is the sequentiality of the process that allows us to form this control group of countries and makes our life easier when we want to estimate the changes in migration costs. So if it were a different exercise, maybe you would need to come up with a different identification strategy to give a number to these changes in migration costs. But then everything else I think stands. One lesson, for example, that we learn here is that if there had been no change in trade policy, the European Union would have lost, and that the intuition for that is that without any change in trade policy, the inflow of migrants from the east to the west would have been even larger, and there would have been a more a heavier congestion effect that creates problems in Western Europe. So in this sense, the change in trade policy accompanying the change in migration policy was good because it was mitigating a little bit the effect of migration policy.
So then it seems like what's the reliance of your results on sort of initial conditions, the initial distribution of redundancy across both the EU team?
That matters for the effects, yes. For the methodology, it's fine. So we can.
You could simulate it, right?
We can fit it to different initial conditions, but they would affect the results. But the methodology, I think, would still be good.
Shirley?
Right.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I am super inspired by your paper. I have two small questions. My first question is, I wonder if there needs to be a question as like, what's the ultimate purpose of the EU enlargement? Like, is it more for a long-term economic gain, or is it more for like forming a more powerful geopolitical force? I guess it's not a question that anyone individually can answer, but does that serve as like steering the model that you design, I think, like towards like which particular questions or conundrums that it could answer. And then my second question is, so it seems like for the new member countries, especially that the low-skilled workers who went to the EU 15 countries to work, it has been an economic gain for these member countries. I wonder, how does it play into effect for longer term when the kind of, let's say, it's the social impact of losing this population, this purposeful displacement of the people, the brothers, the sisters that went out to other countries for a long time, and after a few years, after a long time of not. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like the impact on the original social structure and community and culture space. How does that play an impact into the economic assessment? Would it ultimately become negative for these new member states?
Yeah, I don't know. Start from the end. I mean, very good point. I don't have an answer to that. There are also a number of studies about brain drain, for example, from Eastern European countries because of the enlargement. Impact on the social structure, definitely. There could be that negative impact, but I mean, these people could stay in Eastern Europe, and they were not forced to migrate to Western Europe. So probably, if they did it, it was good at least in the short run. One positive aspect of this, I think, is that with under some conditions, so for example, low-skilled workers in the UK, so there you have to be careful about the timing. This was good for almost everybody. So I think it's a good result here is that we provide that this enlargement, this inflow of migrants, was good for almost all the countries, and we do it with in a scientific way with a model, and then you can criticize the assumption of the model and so on, but it seems to be a first order result here. So that could have spillovers in terms of the social situation in Europe, you know, about all the worries, nationalistic movements, worries about immigrants. Then longer-term effects. Just like most of the trade literature, here we are only looking at static gains from trade. So we are saying if there is an inflow of different workers, your labor market becomes more diverse, you become more productive to some extent. But we are not talking about the effect on innovation, for example, on the growth rate of productivity, and that affects more the longer term, and so that's something that still needs to be explored. Then again, going back to the social situation, I'm very sympathetic to that. We do not have much scientific that we can offer in that term. I'm the biggest fan of the program in Europe, the Erasmus program, which I think is one of the priorities of the new commission to let people move and spend part of their college years in another country. So in this sense, I like migration flows. Instead, I think they could be in the longer term for the social situation could be useful. But this is all out of the model.
So, I had a little trouble figuring out what the research question was of the paper. And you told us to focus on you asked us, would you focus on the introduction? And I wasn't sure when I read the introduction that I really knew what the research question was. You built this, you know, maybe the purpose was to build this model, and it's more a purposeful paper than a research question. I'll just pose that as an idea. And then, because all the data is from 2004 to 7, it's more like it's a historical piece rather than adapting it to today and projecting like forward. And so again, I was thinking, all right, maybe, and if it's an historical economic piece, that's fine. But if you're going to take this model and then imply, you know, use it today to project forward, okay, there are new countries coming into the EU, and maybe a BRIC, and Britain's leaving. What's the next step? And so that seemed like, can your model address that?
Yeah, so in terms of the main research question, I think the point we really want to stress is this interaction between trade policy and migration policy. If you are interested in the effect of either one of those, you have to have the other in the picture. So if you are even just interested in changes in migration policy, you need to have a framework where countries are allowed to trade between themselves in order to really understand what is the effect of a change in the cost of migrating on the decision to migrate. Because the decision to migrate depends, among other things, on the wage that you will get in the new country and the prices of the goods that you will face in the new country. And those things are affected by trade flows. So this is the main point that we want to advance. So far, these two questions, what are the effects of migration policy and what are the effects of trade policy, have been studied separately. We want to study them together. Then, is this an historical paper? Hopefully not. For sure not in terms of model. The problem, the risk is, for example, some parameters that affect results, like the migration elasticity. Is the value that we estimated here good? Is a good value that we want to adopt if we were to evaluate the effect of Brexit? That's another question. So first we have to think why it could not be a good value. So this, we actually, as I mentioned, we extended the period to 2015, which is 5 years back, so it's not so old now. And we estimate also some of these parameters, like the migration elasticity, on this longer time period, and we find very similar values. So first we had estimated it between 2002 and 2007, now between 2002 and 2015, and it doesn't change, basically. So this reassures us that we can use this model to analyze events that can occur nowadays.
I have been in the.
Yes, very
Do you
quickly.
want to talk? Do you want to answer something about?
No, just a follow-up, but that's fine, actually.
Follow up,
Yeah.
Is there a way to get at the possibility that some workers move and then reside in the new country and others are temporary? I mean, I don't know these markets, but I'm guessing some of these construction markets, for example, maybe people go to Poland, work 2 weeks, and they go back. And they still retain their residence in Poland, they bring their income back to Poland. Is there a way to get at
Yeah.
those differences in labor markets at all?
Yeah, we can separate those kinds of
Do you have
workers.
a feel for what, is that important or not?
Our feel is that it's not first order, but
That most people move and reside.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll explore it.
I was wondering if you could maybe comment on the implications of kind of refugees going into Europe and then being able to kind of migrate between different borders.
Within the scope of the model.
Well, it kind of goes. I mean, it kind of goes to like applying it to like nowadays, right? I mean, if they come in through, Italy or whatever, then they end up in Germany. I mean, could it be an economic gain for the entire continent if that happens, or are refugees, kind of throwing this thing out of whack, or should they not be considered, or how would? I don't know.
I mean, here the question is, so how complementary are with the existing labor force, and to the country, would that be Germany or, so that could be, again, so in a sense here, some of the gains that you have in this model are because some factors of production are misallocated. So, for example, the UK was needing more high-skilled workers. That got more low-skilled workers. And if allowing refugees helps reducing a little bit this misallocation, then that's a good effect. But then if the flows is very large, and you could have congestion effects that could play a negative role. So we have always to balance this aside from all the other consideration about having refugees, which.
So I have a final question. Then you have 1 minute to wrap up. But I was so wondering. You mentioned that except low-skilled workers in the UK, everybody gains with these changes. No, that's this estimation. No.
Except for low-skilled workers in the UK, yes.
Okay, but what about if you only implement the trade part? Are there? So I'm trying to figure out exactly what's the pure effect of the reduction in migration barriers, because if just because of the migration barriers going down, workers in relatively rich countries are losing, so then they will be very happy allowing trade, but you will always have issues when you go to the path of also tying trade with migration policies, no? So I think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So here they lose, they will because of migration.
They will lose.
They gain with the trade part. The low-skilled workers in the UK, they gain. They're happy about the reduction in trade costs.
And in other places, in Germany, for example, low-skilled workers net gain. But then what about, I would like to see the effect trade and then migration, no? It's
I see, decompose
decompose, yes, because that tells you exactly what's going to be their stance relative to trade and relatively to migration.
Sure.
And from a political economy perspective, that's
Sure.
very important. No?
Yeah, and also how to present
Yeah.
possible other, yes.
Yeah,
Good
and
point,
if the
yeah.
model can put numbers to those things,
Yeah.
that
I
would
think we
be
can, yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, do you want to wrap up something?
No, I'm fine. Thank you to all of you for all the questions. Let me know if you have more, and I hope to be able to answer to some of those that I didn't answer now in the near future. So, thank you so much.
Cool, Luca, thank you very much.
Just a quick reminder too that on Wednesday we have our grants workshop. So anybody that wants some more information about how that process works and how the workshop can help, just come here and Kate Rasek is running that at noon on Wednesday. And thank you so much again.
Thank you.
That was great.